Since you're sitting there wearing a football shirt, let's do a football analogy. This is a
Okay.
game. This is a game of three halves. Okay. When I reviewed the first film, I ended up saying, the last thing I said was, it builds to a frankly jaw-dropping finale, which the heavily trailered sight of Tom Cruise really driving a real motorbike off a real mountaintop is only an appetizer for what's to come. One of the most audaciously extended action set pieces I've ever seen, which left my nails not so much bitten as gnawed to the bone. The fact this is only the beginning is cause for celebration. Roll on, Dead Reckoning Part 2. Because, I mean, I was absolutely knocked out. That thought
I remember.
we thought it was going to be called Dead Reckoning Part 2 as opposed to The Final Reckoning. I did also say in that review that you're back in a world in which the Jason Statham face-off machine, in which people can wear masks that make them look like other people, which is very Scooby-Doo, is the case. And also, I said when I reviewed the first time around, every time somebody says the entity, you go, could you not have come up with a better name? Because they are going to say the entity a lot, and that becomes, an issue. And in the case of this, the sort of the main plot is essentially you've got two things. You've still got the cruciform key, which was the kind of the thing from the original, and now you've got this other thing, which is the Podcover device, and the cruciform key and the Podcover device have to either be brought together or not brought together, blah 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 blah. Anyway, so game of three halves, let's call it three acts. Act one is the setup, and Act one is loads of boggy exposition, portentous scene setting. It's like wading through treacle. There's a huge amount of sub-messianic hooey, establishing Ethan Hunt as literally the potential savior of everything, everywhere, all at once. He is the best of men in the worst of times. He's basically Jesus. There's montages of all the stuff that he's done in the past, reminding us how we got here. And I did think during that thing, if he doesn't die at the end of this film, I'm going to be disappointed, because they've done so much setting up of the kind of the messianic thing. And I really did think that at the beginning, all that Basil expositioning stuff was done in a way that I thought was simultaneously confusing and boring, and I blame the writing. It's not dialogue. It's interesting that Chris McQuarrie said that both you and him said he loved the scenes without dialogue and that he doesn't trust dialogue. Well, here it's not dialogue. There's a lot of monologuing. There's a lot of people just telling you stuff, and I really found that quite difficult, to the point that as we were getting to the end of that first act, I was thinking, okay, I am disappointed by this, because I was so excited at the end of the second one. I've waded through a lot of treacle and, get going. And incidentally, the entity is still a daft name. Act 2 really begins when Tom gets dropped into the icy waters of the Bering Straits and has to go to the submarine. And this was a scene that Chris McQuarrie referred to. And you go, okay, now we're going. The submarine sequence is fantastic. I mean, McQuarrie said it was one of the most challenging things he's ever shot. And, I'm absolutely certain it was, because it's not only that Tom Cruise is in the submarine, which is flooding and unflooding, and missiles are dropping around, but it's that the submarine itself is rolling towards the edge of a cliff. And you go, and I thought, okay, this is great. This is properly thrilling. I mean, the search for the MacGuffin, he's got to find the thing that does the thing that puts the what's it in the Hujama flip. Doesn't make any difference. It's him doing this thing that has you clinging on the edge of your seat and thinking, this is a brilliantly executed set piece. This is, one of those, the world is rolling very slowly set pieces that has you completely tense, brilliantly edited. I mean, the whole film is, this is a kind of give Oscars to the editors for the action set pieces, because wow, it's incredibly well done. In fact, I interviewed the editor Eddie Hamilton a while ago. We were talking about this, talking about editing. Anyway, so that's fantastic. However, Act 2 is just an appetizer for Act 3, which has got the much advertised biplane stuff. And, Chris McQuarrie may say, well, the planes aren't very fast, so we have to shoot very close in order to make them seem faster than they are. But I genuinely did this thing about checking my heartbeat at one point, because I'm 62. And there was a point in it when I thought, I'm not sure that this is good for me, because I was like, and I thought, okay, this is great. This is IMAX. This is the theatrical cinematic experience. This is what you pay for. And in fact, I sat in the IMAX right at the very back, which I always do. in a corner on my own. And I'm really glad I did, because I found myself vocalizing my reactions without being able to going, oh no, and yelping, gasping and yelping. And I was really glad that I was away from other people, because it just would have looked completely stupid. So it was a fabulous cinematic roller coaster ride. It knocked my socks off, and no one is going to leave the movie feeling shortchanged. In fact, by the time I got to the end, I'd forgotten how dull the first act was. And audiences will forget that. As a critic, however, I do think we need to acknowledge it. There were no such longeurs in Dead Reckoning Part 1. That didn't have any of that stuff in it. And this did feel to me like the weight of it being Final Reckoning was weighed heavy on the script. And I did really, really lose patience with the expositioning and with the setup and with the, and with the messianic stuff.
Once we get to that submarine thing, I remember thinking, wait a minute, instead of that, whatever it felt like an hour, why not just have Simon Pegg do a quirky little funny line where it's like, oh my God, if we don't find this thing, it's the end of the world as we know it. Bang, let's go to the submarine. I swear they could have done that opening act in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that you're not the first person to say that, because I think an awful lot of people would think exactly that, would think, why did we have to have all that stuff doing, what was it, what purpose was it serving? And I think the purpose, well, on the one hand, they were just overwhelmed by the weight of the, it's the final, it's not even Dead Reckoning Part 2, it's the Final Reckoning. I think on the one hand, that's the case. I think on the other hand, it's, as I said, I did this on staging with Eddie Hamilton, who's the editor, and who did, I think, has done a brilliant job with editing those.
Incredible.
I mean, just absolutely astonishing. But the beginning, the first hour, it isn't probably an hour. It probably just felt like an hour. The first movement, what I'm calling Act 1, everything before we get to the scene which you just invented, in which Simon Pegg says something funny and they drop Tom Cruise into the sea, is just like, that's just writing. And it was particularly interesting that Chris McQuarrie was talking about how much he doesn't trust that stuff. And he was thinking, yeah, neither do I. So let's not do it. Yeah. Let's just cut straight to the chase. Two other things I want to say. If I was Tom Cruise and I looked like Tom Cruise, I would insist that there were two scenes in the film which I did in but fighting in his pants. It was Captain Underpants to the rescue. It's like, yes, it doesn't matter that he's in freezing Arctic waters. He is going to do this in his pants. And then there's another scene when he's going to do it in his pants. And I was reminded of, the Jason Statham oil wrestling scenes in, some of his finest works. Yeah, there has to be a moment when I have to take all my clothes off and wrestle in my pants. But, hey, if you looked like Tom Cruise, of course you would. And the other thing is that I don't need to be told time and time and time and time and time again about how, best of man in the worst of times, the only person who could ever do that, it's just like, yeah, I know, it's Tom Cruise, right? The last time I saw him, he was standing on top of the BFI IMAX, right? Yeah. Literally standing on top of it. Yeah. I know, just drop him in his pants into the ocean and start there.
That I just couldn't agree more. I cannot say I came out of that film moaning about the exposition, because, like you say, it was so thrilling.
Because by the time you get there, exactly.
The editing. I'm so glad you spoke about Hamilton, because the editing is phenomenal. I can't say enough about what a proper cinematic thrill ride all of that stuff is. But with hindsight, we are fans. We're talking about Final Destination, Bloodlines. I've not seen anything in between. I'll jump back in and watch number 6. This is Mission Impossible. The people that love it's us, the audience. We've watched every single one. We love this franchise, so we don't need. I know to know. We just chuck him in there. Anyway, it's still great. So
no, but it is. But I can't stress this enough. No one is going to come out of the cinema going, the beginning was really slow. They're going to come out going, oh my God, wow. But as a critic, you do have to say the beginning is really slow and is badly written. That's the point.
Yeah, I was actually I started to get worried because at first I was like, okay, can we move this along? I was a bit annoyed. Then I started to get a bit scared. I was like, oh my God, they haven't dropped the ball
It's
on
not
it,
good.
surely.
It's not good. Yeah. But Ben, you and me, we are so on the same page. I had exactly the same thought that however long it was in, like I said, felt like an hour, probably wasn't an hour. I started to think, they've messed up. They've actually messed up. And then pants in the submarine, we're off.
Yeah, they pull it back. and there's enough. Once they get going, it's like it's almost, you feel a bit more confidence within the writing as well, because once it gets started with the action, you find the exchanges a bit quirkier, a bit more, here's a little wink, funnier lines.
Yeah.
Trammell, who I mentioned in the interview, who plays the submarine chief.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in the film for like 3 minutes, and every line is an absolute banger. So, it's almost like once they get going with the Mission Impossible stuff, the writing follows that as well, and the dialogue improves. I don't know, but that was the vibe I had. Ultimately it was great.
It sounds to me like we had very much the same experience of the film, and I'd be interested to know how many other people feel the same. It may be that other people feel differently and feel that you need that portentous setup. But I'm so glad that you had the same thing that I did. Was, oh heavens, they've dropped the ball.
Yeah,
and then they didn't.
Yeah, I really remember when that sort of process, when your kids start to read to themselves, but they still like you to read every now and again. Sometimes I'd sit with them with the Harry Potter books, which of course they were obsessed with when they were little. Yeah. I remember getting onto like whatever it was, Prisoner of Azkaban or something like that, and it would kick off with Harry, who it'd give you sort of recap of who Harry Potter is, and the kids would go, "Can we just get to the action? We know who Harry Potter is. Don't need this chapter."
But the difference, man, is that would be a little bit at the beginning. Harry Potter isn't a normal boy. It turns out he's a wizard. And you go, I know, I read the other books, but then it's like that. But in this, it's like it's the bigness of the end of the savior of humanity, and he's got to put the cruciform thingy bob into the widgety bong bong, and and I'm going, yeah, I know, and it's going, and when you go in, okay, this is like, I think it's probably the longest. It's like 2 hours 50, pretty much, isn't it? And when you go in, okay, they're going to take their time, but it is like, come on, move, and then it moves.
Yeah, I needed a wee in the exciting bit as well. If I'd have known there was going to be 50 minutes of Basil, I would have had a wee then. So a bit annoyed about that. But no, overall, fantastic. It was going to be really interesting.
Can I just say that the biplane thing is absolutely
unreal.
Seizure-inducing, isn't it? It's just, and it goes up to 11, and then it goes up to 12, 13, 14, 15, and
like you, I didn't have anyone either side of me, which was great, because I was like, move. When you start shuffling, you move to the side, you cross your legs, you uncross your legs. I couldn't sit still. It was unreal, that sequence. Really going to be really interesting to see how people feel about it next week when Simon returns. I think there's going to be a lot of correspondence